What's up, guys, and welcome back to Bass Fishing Tips. And in today's video we're going to be talking about the Neko Rig. And the reason that we're talking about the Neko Rig today is because we as bass anglers overcomplicate everything. Whether it's how we talk about fish and we anthropomorphize the fish and make them have feelings and thoughts and do things that they don't actually do because we're just projecting ourselves as humans onto them, or it be something like a Neko Rig where we have taken something that is pretty dramatically simple and turned it into this overly complicated thing that everybody seems to have a billion questions about. We overcomplicate things. And for me, in my bass fishing world and in a lot of what I do, I follow the KISS method, the keep it simple, stupid method, because there are so many instances where if you just don't overthink it and you stick to the basics of what it needs to be, you're going to be able to accomplish the goal and accomplish the goal well, if not better than everybody else that's trying to overcomplicate it. And to me, that's the Neko Rig. And so in today's video, we're going to discuss my philosophy behind fishing a Neko Rig, the when, the where, the why that I do it. And then we'll talk about how I actually like to rig up a Neko Rig, which is very similar to how I rig other styles of baits, in order to just go out and catch fish, because that's the point. It's catching fish, whether it to be catch more fish, bigger fish, whatever it is. I've always treated the Neko Rig as a tool to go and catch more fish in a scenario where I might not be able to go catch more fish if I didn't make the slight adjustments that I needed to with this bait to go out and get that job done. And so without any further ado, let's get right into the video with my philosophy behind the Neko Rig. So to me, a Neko Rig is essentially a weighted wacky rig. There are going to be people who disagree with me. There are going to be people who have a billion reasons why it's not just a weighted wacky rig, and I can understand those reasons. And I understand them because if you look at the Neko Rig, like I said, it's been overcomplicated, and sort of for a good reason. I'm going to contradict myself here a little bit, but I do want to go down this rabbit hole slightly so that we have a full understanding of the way that I think about a Neko Rig. So yes, the Neko Rig has been overcomplicated, but it's been overcomplicated for some good reasons. Number one is all the different styles of baits. Essentially, you can stick a weight in that or a crawl bait or any bait that you've got on the deck of the boat. I mean, you could stick one in the nose of a ghillie and hook it in the middle and call it a Neko Rig. You can Neko Rig essentially any plastic that you want to and call it a Neko Rig, and they're all probably viable options for catching fish. So that's one side of it, all the different options that we have for baits and shapes and ways to fish the Neko Rig as far as styles of baits. Then you've got the ways to fish a Neko Rig in the style of fishing. If you go back and look at the Bassmaster Classic, the kid who won the Bassmaster Classic was throwing a Neko Rig using forward-facing sonar, fishing for suspended fish. Crazy, but that's what he was doing. He had figured out, I guess, the buoyancy of the plastic with the weight and how to keep that bait up in those fish's face. That in part with the, the way that you hook this bait, the way that it shimmies, it all played into this really detailed, dialed in approach to Neko Rig fishing with forward-facing sonar that allowed him to win $300,000 and be a Bassmaster Classic champion. And so yes, there's a complicated side of it that I think is really important to remember, especially if we want to dial in the Neko Rig really specifically for how we like to fish. But then on the other side of that, the keep it simple, stupid side of that, there's how I kind of approach a Neko Rig. And call me dumb, call me rudimentary, call me whatever you want to, but for me, this is what has caught a ton of fish. It's won me kayak tournaments, it's caught me big fish, it's a slight adjustment on what I'm already doing that oftentimes I don't even mention that I've done it, and it can help me to catch bigger and more fish. And that is simply treating it like a weighted wacky rig, because that is what it is. A Neko Rig is essentially a weighted wacky rig. And there are two worms that I wacky rig the most. One of them being the one that I have rigged up here, which is the Berkley Magnum hit worm. And I love wacky rigging a Magnum hit worm. I think that oftentimes when every other fish and everybody else is fishing your standard stick style bait, when you wacky rig something like a hit worm, you can go and catch some more fish and get some more bites that you might not be able to get just because of the shape and the size. And then the second one being the Berkley Max Scent General. You guys know I love the General. It's one of my favorite, if not my favorite stick bait ever made, and I have caught probably thousands of fish on this bait at this point. And so both of those are baits that I wacky rig consistently. Whether you're watching this channel, you guys see that the wacky rig and the weight, or the wacky rig general has been a bait that is a mainstay on our monthly baits videos just because it catches fish. And or you're over on Alex Red Fishing and you're watching me fish with a wacky rig, you guys see that I catch a ton of fish on it. One thing that I do, and I'll do this often and oftentimes don't even mention that I'm doing it, is simply throw a weight into the head of either the Magnum Hitworm or the General and turn my wacky rig into what we would classify as a Neko rig. Now I do that for two reasons. The first reason is I treat my Neko rig like a wacky rig. Anywhere that I would throw a wacky rig, I'll throw a Neko rig. And the reason that I would put weight in a wacky rig and turn it into a Neko rig is just simply to show those fish a little something different. I think that oftentimes when you're fishing through an area, and whether you're in a kayak or a boat or from the bank, whatever it is, I think really, especially when we're talking about like bank anglers and kayak anglers, we oftentimes can't move great distances. You know, we can't like essentially go from one end of the lake to the other in a 10-minute drive unless you're in your car or something like that. But for the most part, we've kind of isolated ourselves to a certain stretch of bank or a certain area of the lake. And so we have to optimize those areas. And one thing that I've found is when I'm fishing a wacky rig, skipping a wacky rig around docks, you know, fishing around laydown, stuff like that, that I can go through an area, catch fish on the wacky rig, and then throw a little weight into the wacky rig, turning it into a Neko rig, and then go back through that area and pick up some bass that might not have bitten. And the reason for that is it pretty much changes the dynamic of how this lure works. And so when we think about a wacky rig, you're oftentimes gonna hook that bait right in the center of the bait. And as you guys can see here, it's a little off center. It's oftentimes how I like to actually fish the hitworm. But when that bait falls, it's gonna have a shimmy all the way to the bottom, and that hook is gonna be the only weight that's actually dragging that bait down, causing that bait, whether it's a stick bait or a hitworm or whatever you decide to throw it, it's gonna have that shimmy all the way to the bottom. It's gonna be a really slow fall to the bottom. It's almost gonna suspend in those fish's face for a short period of time, and oftentimes those bass are gonna bite that thing before it ever hits the bottom. And so that's the wacky rig. You know, it's very different than what actually the Neko rig is, where when we put that weight into the head of that Neko rig, and that's exactly where my weight's at. You probably can't see it. You might be able to. You probably see that little silver dot right there. That's actually my weight in the end of that bait. It's a little 1/64 ounce tungsten weight, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. It's going to make that bait fall nose down. And then once that bait hits the bottom, you start to move that thing, and you're gonna get that kind of wacky rig style pulse. And all you did was add the weight. We didn't overcomplicate anything. We didn't readjust where the hook was at in the bait. We didn't do anything other than just add that small weight to that bait, turning it into the Neko rig and making it fall to the bottom. And then from that point, be able to drag that thing across the bottom and present the same bass or a different set of bass that may have moved up, a slightly different thing than what a wacky rig really is. And so truly, the Neko rig is something different, but it is still just putting a weight into a wacky rig, letting it sink to the bottom, and then dragging that object on the bottom rather than pitching it in there and letting it fall and then reeling it out and going to the next target. And so that's the first reason that I switch up, is just for the simple fact of I fish a Neko rig anywhere that I would fish a wacky rig as a bait, a plus one, if you will, a follow-up bait to what has already been fished with a wacky rig. The second reason I pick up a Neko rig is a follow-up bait to something else, whether it be a jig, a Texas rig, a crankbait, any of those style of baits, especially when we're talking about offshore fishing. You know, when you're offshore and you've drug, you know, just a Texas rig worm or a jig or cranked a crankbait through an area, you got a school fired up, and or you just caught some individual fish on an area and you need to throw something in there that's just a little bit different. The Neko rig, in my opinion, is one of the best follow-up baits that you can throw. And the reason for that is essentially, again, it's a weighted wacky rig. There's something about that center point rigging on this bait. When you get that pull and it makes that pulsing action that a wacky rig has and that a Neko rig has, it is one of the most deadly kind of presentations to get bass, especially bass that don't want to bite, to get them to eat something. And I can't tell you how many times I've been fishing on a point or fishing on a brush pile or fishing offshore, or even fishing onshore, near shore, like 10 foot of water, be fishing a brush pile, throw a Texas rig in there 2 or 3 times, catch some fish, and then throw the Neko rig in there, and the biggest fish in that brush pile eat. And I think a lot of that has to do with that center point rigging and that action that it has when you actually pull that thing. It's very similar again to the wacky rig. It's that center point kind of twitch to get those bass to eat. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my philosophy behind the Neko rig. I really try not to overcomplicate what I'm doing with the Neko rig, the baits that I choose with the Neko rig. I essentially take what I've already wacky rigged and I just add a weight to it. Now, there is some specific pieces of gear that you'll need or need to add to your tackle box. You may already have them, but that you'll need to add to be able to effectively Neko rig something that's already been wacky rigged. And so the first one's gonna be this little doohickey. You guys can probably see that little black tab sticking up right there. That's called a Neko hack. These things are really, really cool. And so they're made by a company called G-Crack, and they're essentially a little plastic tee, if you will, that you stick into the bait and then cut off. And so I'll pull one out here so that we can see, and I've talked about these on the channel before, but I use these a lot when I'm wacky rigging, and I'll go ahead and pre-rig my wacky rig and have it ready to be Neko rigged for when I'm ready to switch. But essentially, you guys can see here that you've got like this little tee. So this part goes into the back of your worm, as you guys can see there. So there's a little black part in the back of the worm. And then this is gonna stick through the body of the worm. And right there's a little hole. That's actually what your hook is gonna go through. And then you're gonna clip off the rest of that excess plastic. This part of the little Neko hack is simply made to push it into the plastic. And then once you've pushed it into the plastic, that little loop will be sticking out. And that little loop is what you actually stick your hook through, thus essentially wacky rigging or Neko rigging your worm or your piece of plastic, whatever you're deciding to use this with, and turning it into, you know, a wacky rigged bait. And then once you add your weight, then you have your Neko rig. And so you guys can see there, I'll kind of pull it out there so you can see how that's actually rigged up. But that little plastic piece right there, that little Neko hack, is what's actually holding my hook in there. And I use these things a lot with my stick baits and then my worms like this. And a lot of times on the Alex Short Fishing channel, a lot of people will say, you know, Alex, if you use, you know, the little O-rings and stuff like that, the wacky rigs will last longer. And a lot of the times I'm actually fishing a Neko hack and they don't even realize that I'm fishing a Neko hack just because it's very non-intrusive. A lot of times you can't even tell it's there. And I really like them because it allows the entirety of that hook to be out in that point and the travel on that hook to be able to actually get those fish hooked. Now, another thing that I always try to do is I try to actually rig my hook vertical instead of horizontal. And so horizontal would be this way. You know, it's that traditional wacky rig style where you just hook that bait straight through the center. Well, with your Neko hack, because you actually have it in there, the way that I rig it is going to be horizontal or in line with the bait. So you guys can see the bait is in line there. And the reason we want to do that is when we actually throw our weight in the bottom or in the nose of the bait. With the stick bait, it's going to be a little bit different because there technically isn't a nose or a tail side. I mean, there's like an obvious bigger, fatter portion. That's where you're actually going to want to put the weight. But the reason that we want to do that is because you want the hook point to be pointing up towards the tail of the bait. So essentially you want that hook point to be on the top. And the reason for that is when a bass bites, oftentimes they're going to eat that thing like this, and when you pull up onto them, you're going to hook them right in the roof of the mouth, the hard spot of the mouth. You're going to get a really good hook into them, and then you're going to be able to essentially fight that fish with not a lot of worry, because when you get them hooked good, especially with one big single hook, they often stay hooked. But we want to make sure that we're hooking them in the bottom or in the top of the mouth, not the bottom of the mouth, because hooking them in the bottom of the mouth often ends in the fish either spitting the hook or we like hooking them in the gill or some other part like that, and then we've just got a bleeding mess of a fish that isn't fun. And so when you rig that Neko hack, make sure that you rig it where you can rig that hook horizontally and in line with the bait with that point sticking up away from the head of that bait. Now, as far as where the weight actually goes, it's what we've been talking about. It goes into the head of that bait. Now, what I use is just a little bitty just essentially a Neko weight. It's a tungsten nail weight. Oftentimes they're gonna come in this little fashion, and I like the little tungsten ones because you're able to get a lot more weight in a really small package. But as you guys can see here, it's just a little weight with a pointed end, and then there are little bitty like serrations, we'll say, on the side, and that's actually what's going to hold that weight into that bait. And so essentially what you do is really, really simple, and I actually rigged this one up so that we could pull this weight out of here. You're going to take that little weight, you're going to take the pointed end of that little weight, and you're going to just stick it into the nose of that bait, and then there you go. That's a Neko rig. It's as simple as that. I mean, really. And so what's really, really cool is when you do that, you can pull that weight in and out. You can either present them with a wacky rig or a Neko rig, and all you have to do is either add the weight or take the weight out, and it goes from being a wacky rig to a Neko rig and then back again in whatever fishing situation that you're in. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's why I try to keep it really, really simple and just keep it super straightforward so that I can have a wacky rig rigged up, be fishing with a wacky rig, and then if I feel like I need to switch it up and just stick that weight in there, then I can pitch a Neko rig in there, work it around a dock or a brush pile or something like that, pull that weight back out, and then keep on fishing. And or if I've already fished through an area with a wacky rig, just being able to stick a weight into the bait that I'm already using, whether it be a hit worm or a general or something like that, and thus turning it into a Neko rig and be able to fish back through an area and pick up some bites that you might not have got. And then still, I keep it on my standard wacky rig setup. Throwing the little 1/0 wacky rig hook, 10-pound fluorocarbon leader, 10-pound mainline braid, spinning reels, a 3500 size Revo Rocket by Abu Garcia, and then a 7-foot medium spinning rod. Keep it simple, stupid. That's my theory behind Neko rigging. Now again, we can make it as complicated as we want to. We can add in all the other extra stuff that we need to, especially if you're like me on certain techniques and you really, really start to dial in the little nuances, you can do that. But if you're new to bass fishing, if you're looking for something that you already got in your box, a way to rig something that you've already got in your box, or if you just need a couple extra parts, this is the way to do it. This is one of the easiest ways to turn a wacky rig into a Neko rig, and then to be able to go out and catch some fish that other people might not be able to catch. So yeah, guys, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. And if you enjoyed this video, click this video. It's popping up right here.